Living in a cluttered environment can cause stress and anxiety for a lot of people. And if you're at a point where you're feeling overwhelmed with clutter, then in this video, I'm going to take you through some essential tips to help you take control of your clutter and reduce your stress levels. So tip number one is to plan your declutter. And I would say that this is probably one of the most important steps if you're thinking about decluttering. And it's not something that I did before I started my decluttering process. If I had, I probably would have saved myself a lot of time and stress. So what I would suggest is going into each room and writing down each area of your room that you're going to want to look through and potentially declutter. Go throughout your whole house so that in the end you have a list of all of your rooms and all of the areas in each room that you're going to look through. Then when it comes to decluttering, you can just make your way through your list and tick it off as you go along. This means that you're less likely to miss areas and need to come back to them later, and you can plan what rooms you're going to declutter and when. This doesn't mean to say that you have to declutter all of your rooms at once or even all the areas in one room all in one go. But what it does mean is that if you're not going to do it all in one go, and I suggest that you don't try and do it all in one go, you can come back to it knowing which point you're at. And this leads me to the second tip, which is don't try to declutter everything all at once. When you're following your plan and you're going through each room and ticking all the areas off your list, don't go into the process thinking that this is the one and only time you'll be able to do this and you have to get it right this time. We did a major declutter of our stuff before we moved home into a smaller home, but once we moved I realised there were more things that I wanted to declutter. And certainly there were some things that I had thought about decluttering before we moved, but I decided to hold off because I just didn't feel ready to make a decision. But once we moved, I returned to those items and then I was able to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to keep them. The difficulty is if we force ourselves to make decisions, we might make decisions that we regret in the future. And we don't want to end up in a cycle of decluttering and purchasing again because maybe we've decluttered something too rashly. And this leads me on to the next tip, which is to put aside any items you're unsure of. There are going to be things that you're not sure about decluttering, and rather than force yourself to make a decision straight away, put those items aside for the time being. It might be helpful to put them in a bag or a box or some sort of container where you can keep them all together. And what I've seen other people do is they put the container in a certain place out of sight for a certain period of time, around a month for example, and then go back to the container and review the items that are in it. So did you think about using any of those items during the time that they were tucked away in that container? How does it feel to look at them when you're not doing a major declutter? Do you feel any differently about whether or not to keep them? Tip number 4 is to avoid creating clutter magnets. I myself have found that clutter attracts clutter. So if I leave things on the countertop such as junk mail that I've not bothered putting in the recycling, more clutter gets put on top of those things over time. And sometimes it ends up being a mixture of things that do need to be recycled or thrown away and items that I need to keep. So these days I try and make a habit of sorting through the clutter at the end of the day, or if I do get things like takeout menus come through the door, I put them in the recycling straight away because I know I'm not going to need them. And if you're finding this video helpful, please give it a like so that we can share it out to more people. Thank you. Tip number 5 is to review your spending habits. Taking control of your clutter isn't just about decluttering, it's also about being more mindful about what you bring into your home in the first place. It's all very well decluttering, but the problem is if we don't take control of our spending, we can get into a cycle of buying and then decluttering, buying even more stuff and then decluttering. So we don't actually reduce the overall amount of possessions we have. So the best way to prevent clutter from building is to take a look at your spending habits. So do you have triggers to your spending? For some people, they might buy more things when they feel a certain way, when they feel low in mood perhaps. For me, my trigger point is when I feel I might be missing out on something. So if there's a time limited sale or something is supposedly discounted at what seems to be a really good price for a limited time, I get that fear of missing out. I get that feeling of urgency that I need to get this thing at the discounted price, otherwise I'm going to lose out on it. But the weird thing is that when I have found out that these things are not necessarily truly discounted, or that actually this time limited deal is something that's been going on for many months, that drive to buy the item and get it while it's around, it just disappears because I know there's no urgency around it anymore. And that's the power of marketing tactics, pulling us in, getting us to buy, to consume through different sorts of emotions. So that's why it's good to get more aware of the types of emotions where you're more likely to spend your money. And then when those feelings come up, you know that this might be a time where you're tempted to buy something you don't really need. Tip number 6 is to store items in your save for later basket. If you're feeling tempted to buy something, I've found it helpful to put the item in my save for later basket and come back to it perhaps a week or even later down the line. This gives me time to think through whether I do actually want the item, and if I've got those feelings, say, of missing out. Usually those feelings have disappeared or they've reduced a lot a week or so down the line, so that I'm not going to be buying from a place of fear of missing out or fear of not having this item. I'm able to look at it a lot more objectively with a lot less emotion attached and through a bit more logical thinking. So giving yourself a bit more time before you press that buy now button can make a lot of difference if you're trying to reduce buying things you don't really need. And of course, we do talk a lot about decluttering in minimalism, but decluttering is just one part of the puzzle. Another part of the puzzle is building habits that help to keep your space clean and clutter-free. And if you'd like to learn some simple habits to help you do this, then check out the video that's on the screen now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.